This is the Media Police Post, broadcasting from the Fort Hall School of Government. In this show, we police the state of truth in the Republic. And because truth is communicated to us by journalists and analysts, we have made it our civic duty at the Fort Hall School of Government to put it to the test. We advance from two confirmed truths about the media. One, and according to Roger Stone, the media is either lazy or evil. And for the most part, it is both evil and lazy. That is why their truth, must be put to a test. Two, another confirmed truth is that journalism is verified gossip. In fact, what is presented to us as news analysis is gossip that has been verified by journalists. This gossip has to be ground truthed. And so for the next 2 years, we will monitor columnists. We will assess the state of truth in what they submit to the Republic, and we will pass verdict on what is true and what is not. For the record, we are not journalists, we are thinkers. We are not lazy or evil, we are thinkers, and we do not verify gossip. What we give you is the truth that sets you free. On today's show, we will discuss our favorite columns of last week, columns which reflect informed and uninformed opinions, and finally, columns that made you stupid. Now, columns that made you stupid are columns which A, fall into the cognitive trap of we see things as we are, not as they are. B, columns based on conjuncture history, and C, columns that smack of envelope journalism. Welcome, ladies. Who would like to kick us off? And what category of columns would you like to discuss?
This week, I go back to the elephant, where I read an article by a lady called Rasna Wara. It was written on December 4th, and it's titled, BBI has distorted our democracy. There were some things that were insightful, and some things in the article that were plain naive. I'll begin with some of the naive ones. So Rasna tells us that personally, she has no grudge against Uhuru Kenyatta, except that he has used his family's name, connections, wealth and power to gain political leadership. Without these, she says, he might never have ascended to power. And she says that she believes he has yet to grow into his own man, on his own, and not on his family's strength. I'm wondering, if I had all those connections, why would I not use them to get to power? Anyway, Rasna goes on to tell us that I'm sure if I met Uhuru, we might even get along. He seems to be the kind of guy you could have a good laugh with over a beer. But then she asks us whether we should entrust a drinking buddy with a title deed, her title deed, or her property, or with the welfare of her grandmother. And she concludes, probably not. And she says that she wouldn't because he is surrounded by predators such as the deputy president.
Spot on.
She then outlines the betrayal she felt when Raila did the handshake. Whilst telling us that she may not have much to discuss with Raila over a beer, she is perceptive in one regard about Raila. She says that he is a master strategist who will enforce his reformist agenda through the handshake. They say that Raila is known to neutralize or demolish a ruling party by infiltrating or joining hands with it, as he did with Moise Kanu. In essence, he destroys the ruling party from within. And from this, I couldn't agree more. However, Rasna doesn't buy this theory. She feels that the handshake has only served to legitimize Uhuru's government. But whether she buys it or not, we cannot ignore the facts. Uhuru's government is stronger, more resolute post-handshake. Rasna then points out that the majority of those who consistently oppose the Jubilee government do so because they believe that their government is on the wrong path and is actually causing harm to the majority of the country's population. But I actually think that it is her second theory that is more interesting, and one we can agree on. And she says that we should not form opposition parties simply because you have a personal vendetta against the leader of the ruling party. So you see, political parties should be based on ideals and ideology, and not on the personal ambitions or the pet peeves of their leaders. Rasna states that the proponents of the BBI are being cheeky. that although BBI will bring about equity and national unity, it is what they're not saying that is most worrying to her. And she says that some of the dangers is that while the BBI is being touted as the great unifier, the glue that will hold our ethnically divided country together, what its drafters have failed to recognize, she says, is that placing a Luo at the high table will not resolve ethnic differences in this country. She says because our ethnic animosities are the result of poor leadership and bad politics. But in my opinion, the reality is that Kenya still has an ethnic problem to solve. So why does she ignore that? Yet knowing that BBI offers a move away from the winner-take-all system by ensuring that many more tribes can have a seat at the executive table. So those who resist elite consensus, in my opinion, are asking how the privilege can be overthrown. And for me, BBI offers them the answer because a parliamentary model would be the answer to their issues. There are many reasons why a change is due, and we should not tire until we get it to fit our complex reality. She also argues that Kenya is on the verge of becoming a dictatorship. And she says, to get an idea of the dangers we might be facing, just look at what has happened to Nairobi County. She says that the Jubilee Party wholeheartedly supported a dubious candidate, this we can agree, for Nairobi County Governor, and then proceeded to strip him and the county of its powers. She says that Nairobi was militarized through an executive order and the appointment of a military officer to head the illegally constituted Nairobi Metropolitan Services. So I think, let's take a walk around Nairobi now. And we see that the improvement and dignity that Nairobians have to look forward to. In my opinion, should Uhuru have let Nairobi languish just so that the gains of democracy are not supposedly eroded? I personally thank Uhuru for taking a bold decision to restore Nairobi to its former glory. Lastly, the more I listen to public discourse, the more I am convinced that BBI is indeed an attempt to recalibrate an already progressive constitution. And therefore, it cannot be a distortion to our democracy, especially if this conversation moves us forward. Rasna argues that our democracy is fragile and the role of the opposition has been muted. Yet, for me, I see that BBI has offered us a way to institutionalize and to formalize the role of the official opposition. Lastly, President Kenyatta told us that 10 years after our progressive constitution, the moment calls us to do better. So instead of a ceasefire document that enforces a zero-sum game, in which the winner takes all, the moment calls for us to create a constitutional order that will long endure. And I believe that. So we all ought to remember that good strategy has people seeing the forest from the trees. And so people need to start seeing the bigger picture. Kenya needs to see the urgency of it all. So while everyone believes that their bit of the constitutional conversation is the most important, no one is standing back and looking at the big picture. Everyone is so concerned of getting every detail exactly perfect that they forget the purpose of what they're doing, that they're so concerned with the form that they forget the function and purpose.
Today, I would like to address a column that reflects uninformed and uninformed opinion. And this is a column by Sami Giteri, a weekly columnist in The Star. And there is nothing wrong, he says that there is nothing wrong with our laws. It is just us as citizens of Kenya. Now, Mr. Giteri contends that there is no constitutional moment. He further states that in his opinion, and I quote, "The myriad of problems bedeviling our nation has not been occasioned by the constitution or inadequate laws and policies. Rather, Kenya's maladies are societal based. Our society ostracizes virtues and embraces vices," end quote. Sami Giteri is dead wrong on this one. First, are we in a constitutional moment? Most certainly. No one has put it better than the president, who recently remarked during his Jamhuri Day address that you have a constitutional moment when the soul of the nation is constantly in turmoil. Second, Mr. Giteri and those who agreed with him in this article would do well to educate themselves on constitutional regimes and constitutional consequences. Now, as a society, and especially a young nation that just turned 57, we are very much a product of our constitutional makeup and the regime of laws that govern us. The constitutional formula that a country selects has a profound effect on the state of politics, the state of the economy, and the degree even of social cohesion amongst its citizens. Now, our old constitutional regime was a hybrid one between a parliamentary system and a powerful presidential system. And until the year 1992, we had a single-party government which concentrated a great deal of power around one person, and that was the president, the institution of the presidency. Now, that constitutional architecture entrenched the practice of patronage politics. But you will recall even before that, with the Independence Constitution, during the colonial era, we had pretty much the same principle of patronage playing out, that same culture. The laws from the colonizers were meant to oppress, they were meant to facilitate extraction and exploit our resources, and they were meant to divide and rule Kenya through its ethnic groups. Now, if we are corrupt, if we are ethnically divided, it is because our colonizers socialized us to be that way. And we haven't done much by way of trying to rectify that. But BBI now is the promise to that problem. Now, the 2010 Constitution hardly broke with that past. And although it does share power, and although it entrenches that principle of separation of powers more firmly than the old Constitution, it still remains majoritarian in nature. The fact of the matter is that two large ethnic groups plus one small one, or a few smaller ones, can form electoral coalitions to secure the 50% plus one vote required to form government. And therefore, if status quo prevails, the fact of the matter is this: Gama and Kalenjin, those two nations, can circulate power amongst themselves in perpetuity. And as a result, this constitutional regime is exclusionist. Now, if we don't share power, because we don't, and our political leaders are not inclined to share power, it is because the Constitution has not incentivized them to share that power. And the BBI Constitutional Amendment Bill will ensure a number of things. Let me state four. It will ensure that government develops broad programs benefiting a majority of the voters. It will give us better electoral participation, lower levels of a politically motivated violence, and even higher women's representation. Altogether, it'll be a win-win on very many accounts. I'd like to end with the words of the president, again from his Jamhuri Day address, in which he addressed BBI very, very well. He said BBI is the driver of the First Amendment to the 2010 Constitution. And BBI is not a one-size-fits-all that promises to settle all the constitutional questions through a singular amendment. In fact, it is a starting point to a continuous process of constitution making for our young nation. Lastly, he said BBI will not resolve all our constitutional grievances of the day. It is just a First Amendment to the Constitution. Now, this Sami Gatera guy, he needs to go and, read up, disabuse himself of all the ignorance that he's got.
This week, I would like to veer away from the BBI discussions that we have had and will continue to have as we move towards the referendum. And I'd like to make a comment on the piece by Wycliffe Muga published in The Star on Thursday, the 3rd of December, and he titled it, "Kenyans Now Free to Ignore Opinion Polls." I thought it was a very interesting title. He begins by noting the fuss made about the youth vote at every general election and at every referendum. He says, and I quote, that the received wisdom here is that the vote block that matters the most when it comes to scoring a major political victory, that is the youth vote. He states that, and I have to agree with him, that while no doubt Kenya has a mostly youthful population, when it comes to the final tally, there is rarely any youth vote to speak of, decisively leading one candidate to victory and another to defeat. Instead, we see the same old patterns that have been self-evident since independence. These are that Kenyans will vote by region or by tribe or by clan, but rarely on account of age. On the importance of the youth vote, Muga posits two reasons. He says the first is that you cannot have a colorful, dynamic election campaign without the youth. It is mostly young people who will turn up in their thousands to attend the mammoth rallies beloved of Kenyan presidential candidates. But he also notes as a caution that any crowd to be seen at a political rally is an exceedingly small part of the total population of that area. The second reason, and according to him, is not at all funny, but actually quite tragic. Older people will generally have something to do every day when they get out of bed, or they may be living off some kind of meager pension. But the tragedy of Kenyan youth is that an incredibly high number of them are unemployed. So they not only welcome any little excitement that may come their way in the course of an election campaign, but they're often politicians who are only too ready to part with cash in the name of mobilizing the youth to attend a rally. Is this true? Yes and no. So according to the 2019 census, and the census is the truth, it is the official record, 35.7 million of the 47 million Kenyans that make up our country, or 75% of the population, is aged between 0 and 34. This is the age bracket that we call youth in this country. But our youth in the labor force are aged between 18 and 34, unless you subscribe to child labor. And an interesting thing in the census, that same census, is that 62% of the youth aged between 18 and 34 are working. Now, I don't think there was an incentive for the youth to lie. I mean, if this census person is asking you if you have a job, you should say you don't have one. Nothing would make you lie and say. So without disregarding the effect of COVID, by and large, a large number of the youth are productively engaged. But I really wonder where he got this idea that the youth who come for the rallies are not employed. Anyway, according to everyone, the youth are very important. And at the launch of the BBI report, the president pointed out that the country has a youth bulge that, if not properly handled, was a destructive time bomb. And that the only way to manage it was to include the youth in decision making. He also said that if we are to deal with our youth problem, we have to deal with our economy. I'll try and answer the question of why the youth generates such a buzz by borrowing from the words, and you must bear with me, if English came on a boat, French did not arrive in this country. Alain Badiou, in his short book, which he titles The True Life, and that has a tagline I find particularly interesting, a plea for the corrupting of the youth. And no, this is not the Kenyan type of monetary corruption where you pay someone to get something done for you. So for Badiou, the corruption of the youth, if it should happen, should not be for the sake of money, pleasure, or power, but to show the youth that there is something bigger than all those things. The true life, something worthwhile, something worth living for, that far outstrips money, pleasure, and power. I know this sounds lofty, and I'm not quite sure I believe it, but I'll continue to say something he says. Badiou explains in his book that young people are subject to two inner enemies. The first is a passion for immediate pleasures. This could explain their willingness to get quick cash in the form of handouts at political rallies. While the second is the drive to success within the existing social order. So as revolutionary as young people wish to think they are still bound by the rules of their society. So I agree with Wycliffe Muga that the youth are much like the Trump voter, unwilling to reveal their true intentions to pollsters. And I accept his unsolicited advice over the upcoming BBI referendum, where he says, feel free to ignore any reports issued by the local pollsters. Why? Because the famed youth will vote just like their parents. And what will that be? For their tribe. And maybe this may change in future, but for now, this is a truth we hold as self-evident.
Wow.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for joining us on Media Police Post. Columnists, remember, this is going to be a weekly show. We want to put you on notice. We are watching you. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Have a good evening.